Hello, welcome to another exciting episode of Objective Health. We decided this week that we wanted to for a change, do a show about the coronavirus. And so we decided that we would bring on a very special guest, editor of SOT.net, Joe Quinn. So welcome, Joe.
Thanks for the invite.
So Joe, just to start things off, maybe you could tell everybody why you want everybody to die.
Well, me and Prince Charles, or not Prince Charles, but the Duke of Edinburgh, is that his name? Prince Charles's father, Duke of Windsor, I think his name is. Philip.
It's Philip.
Philip, yeah. He's on record as having said that humanity is a virus. And or that humanity is like a plague or something, or humanity that they all need to die, and that if he reincarnates, he wants to come back as a virus and kill everybody. So I spent a lot of time hanging out with him, and he convinced me basically. So that's why I want everybody to die, and that's why I'm so happy about coronavirus.
Right, makes sense.
Those are some true life goals right there.
Yeah, that's true about Prince Philip though.
Yeah,
that and. Although obviously this coronavirus isn't his fault because he's not dead yet. So he's not reincarnated as a virus just yet, probably some other member of his family.
Right.
Anyway, not to be disrespectful to the royal family, but yeah, I am being disrespectful to the royal family.
No, I was just being facetious, obviously, because it seems like whenever anybody speaks out against kind of the lockdown measures and the coronavirus and actually analyzing the numbers and actually putting some truth out there, that's kind of the automatic response that you get from people. It's either you accept everything that's going on or you just want people to die.
Right.
Or more specifically, you want to kill grandma.
Yeah. We want to kill old people.
Yeah.
From the very beginning of this, I mean, it really is a farce if you look into it in enough depth. From the very beginning, the thing that struck me about it was that it was as if, most of the world suddenly woke up to the fact that people die, and they were horrified by it. Most people, you get the impression that most people really didn't know, at least they were not, conscious on anything like a daily basis or even a weekly or regular basis that large numbers of people die in their countries every week, every day, every week, every month, and that having these numbers, of large numbers of deaths suddenly shoved in their faces every day by the media, every hour really. I don't know, something happened to them and they just couldn't take it. And of course, when it's attached to the idea, as it has been by governments and the media, that it's a virus that's, that anybody can spread and that they're responsible, potentially responsible for people dying. This is all, new and shocking to them. And it's just amazing. I mean, one thing I should say that probably in the course of this discussion, I'm going to kind of explain a lot of things ultimately by just the idiocy of a large percentage of the people on this planet.
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't, in many cases, there is, if you want for answers to what's actually going on, what has been going on in the past couple of months, there aren't very many complex answers to it. Really, and there's far more simplistic answers to it, and one of those, the primary simplistic answer to it, not simplistic but simple answer and true answer, is that people just are, generally speaking, clueless. They don't know what's going on around them. They generally don't know what's going on around them in the world. They're limited to their little private individual lives, and everything outside of that bubble is, just almost doesn't exist for them, So like I was saying, when the media and the government suddenly intrude on that bubble with shocking facts and statistics that implicate them as being potentially responsible for them, and in this case, killing people, they just, a lot of people just lose all sanity, all sense, and believe wholeheartedly what the government is saying, and the remedy to that would be a little bit of a little bit of awareness, a little bit of understanding on their part about, like I was saying, about the death tolls in their respective countries, how many people die every day around them that they don't see, and this whole thing wouldn't be such a big deal to many people if they were aware of those things, but apparently they're not.
Yeah, like if you look at things like comparisons to flu deaths, heart attacks, cancer, like any of those kinds of things, it's just like the numbers of COVID deaths are actually minuscule by comparison.
Right. Well, I wouldn't say necessarily minuscule, but they're in the same ballpark. Not something, not
for
remarkable.
Flu, yeah.
Yeah, for flu. I think the UK's numbers officially, the numbers, and we can talk about how they get their numbers, but the official numbers of death by COVID, as the media and the government tends to portray it, is 30,000 people in the past, since the start of the year or since February, whenever. 2 years ago, 2017, 2018 flu season, it was a bad flu season, and there were estimated to be 50,000 deaths related to the flu. And you ask anybody in the street in the UK about that, and they won't know, they won't have heard about it because nobody told them about it, right? The media didn't say anything, the government didn't say anything. I mean, it was in the media here and there, the odd article, but nobody paid any attention because there was no alarm bell sounded, no DEFCON 5, So, but the fact of the matter is that 2 years ago in the UK, and around the same time of year, 50,000 people died as a result of the flu. And of course, I mean, you can go back then. You could have gone back then. If 2 years ago, if the government and the media wanted to portray the flu, the high estimated number of flu deaths 2 years ago in the winter season 2 years ago, they could have done exactly the same thing that they're doing today. They could have chosen to do it 2 years ago, and they would have had more numbers to justify it. They would have had 50,000 instead of 30,000. But they didn't, and instead they chose this year, and they chose to pick a virus that is very similar to the flu in its effects and in its mortality rate, and they decided to just go full totalitarian idiots on it. And there's no other, I don't know, I mean, you can argue up and down, you can look at stats for this or that or the other, but the bottom line for me is that the numbers do not justify what they've been doing, and you have to come up with a different explanation as to why they're doing that. You can't blame it on, you can't say that this virus is justification for the lockdowns. So, but that's what, when I post a lot of articles and stuff and data on Facebook that convince the odd person that there's something else going on, their immediate question is why. Okay, it looks like I might believe you or whatever, but why are they doing this? Why would they do this? I mean, they're accepting that the virus isn't a reasonable excuse to lock down the country and cause all the kind of problems and suffering and misery and probably deaths. So why are they doing it? That people want to know why, and that gets you into a whole other kind of situation, a whole other scenario. You have to. That's a different story then, a different narrative, as to why. But I tend to not want to give any explanations, because by definition it would be, I mean, you can give some explanations, but it's by definition theoretical because you don't have hard evidence for it. So I tend not to want to answer that question and answer that question by saying, listen, I don't have to have a reason why, because a lot of people seem to be making a contingent on accepting what you say, accepting the data and the evidence that's in front of their eyes, that there's no justification. The virus is not a justification for these lockdowns. They tend to, they come across as if that they'll only believe that data, even though they accept that it's true. They'll only believe that data if you can explain then why they're doing the lockdown. If you're saying the virus, they'll accept that the lockdown is not justified by the virus or the numbers from the virus, but they're not going to accept that data until you explain why. Mm-hmm. And I say, well, I don't need to explain why, and you don't have to have an answer as to why to recognize that it's not justified. I mean, we can try and figure out why afterwards. But first, the first order of business is to stand up and speak out and say, this makes no sense. And as Donald Trump, not that I'm a Donald Trump supporter, but as he said, at the beginning, I think, he warned against the cure being worse than the problem. And he was right. That the cure probably very likely is, well, it is, not very likely, it is far worse than the problem, because really there is no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting that they call it a cure.
Yeah.
Well, like you said 2 years ago, Joe, about the flu season being worse, almost double worse. I was looking at statistic. I can't remember which country it was based in, either the US or the UK, and it was saying in the past, I think it was since 1997, there's been 5 or 6 cases of flu seasons which far surpass the amount of deaths that we've had with the COVID. And so the numbers simply don't add up. Historically, there have been many kind of more justification to be able to implement this kind of control. So the question is, why now? Why is this different? It doesn't really make sense.
Do we want to theorize about that? or
Sure.
Can I answer that question as to why?
I think it's always helpful to ask who benefits in the face of a situation like this. And one of the primary beneficiaries, in my opinion, I mean, it's pretty obvious when you see all of the trillions of dollars being laid out to the bankers, given to them for bailouts. That's the number one place to look.
Right.
I mean, there have been financial analysts who've been talking over the last years, maybe 10 years or so, saying that the level of debt that just the United States has alone is not sustainable. There's going to be a crash. There's going to be a crash. There's going to be a crash. We don't know when it's going to happen, but it's coming soon. So this happened at a convenient time.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't know necessarily the exact mechanism by which they would be dealing with that economic problem, and I'm not sure there is. I mean, the economy for many decades has functioned on essentially kind of funny money, if you know what I mean, the fiat system, and it's the what they call the economy is really decoupled has been for a long time decoupled from the real economy, if you know what I mean, the bricks and mortar economy, the amount of money floating around the world and shares and equity basically floating around the world is totally decoupled from the actual from any reference to the actual value in any given country and by extension the entire world. So I tend to think that they probably could keep it going for quite a while longer because they've been doing it for so long anyway. But I wonder, that doesn't mean that they don't have a reason to want to do what they're doing in terms of, some people have said like resetting the economy or kind of closing it down as they have to a large extent, and then reestablishing it or opening it up again on a slightly different footing, but for sure, I mean, there's been mainstream articles about this, about how a lot of people have been benefiting, major kind of hedge fund managers and major banking institutions, etc., who have made a lot of money out of essentially shorting the economy. You know what I mean? I mean, when you get wind of something like this coming down the pipeline, you can make a lot of money if you bet that that many companies are going to kind of go to the wall. So a lot of people undoubtedly have made, a lot of individuals and organizations have made a lot of money from this. So that's one benefit. The other thing, obviously, is the push for a vaccine. I mean, vaccines have been around for quite a long time, and the uptake in vaccines is it's not bad. I'm not sure about the US, but in European countries, it averages about 70% of the over 65-year-olds, which, isn't a majority by any stretch of the population, and a lot of the pharmaceutical companies have, stand to make a lot of money out of, or do make a lot of money out of vaccinations. But and no doubt they would like to make more money. But the only way they can really make more money than they have already been making is to vaccinate more people. And certainly this the fear mongering around this SARS-2 has the potential to encourage a lot more people, younger people, and maybe the rest of the over 65s, the other 25% that haven't been getting the flu vaccination and other vaccinations every year. It's a way to encourage them to get it. So you might see a significant increase in vaccinations, not just for when they come out, if and when they come out with a vaccine, a supposed vaccine for this SARS-2, but also for other vaccinations in general, because of the fear that has been spread around, and also younger people deciding to take a vaccine, to accept vaccines. And that all means, Bill Gates explicitly said, I think it was in the context of talking about this situation, he said that that the lockdown is not going to end fully until we vaccinate the entire globe.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it depends on the price. Obviously, the price would vary and stuff, but vaccines, or a couple $100 or something is banked in Western countries between $100 and $200 is banked per vaccine from government coffers into the pharmaceutical companies' bank account. So, multiply 8 billion by 100.
Mm-hmm.
800 billion, trillion, maybe close to $1 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's an incentive for sure, but that's always been an incentive, for them to push vaccination programs on people. So I don't know. What else? Governments like control. Well, the strange thing about this situation is that I've noticed that there's been the governments around the world. Most governments around the world have operated operated in lockstep with each other, but more likely with someone. It's like, the kind of dates that they gave for turning off the lockdown, the dates that they all came on. They were either following each other or they were following someone else. I mean, the first countries to lock, well, obviously it was China, then Iran, but you didn't hear much about those. China kind of did its own thing, but in Europe it was Italy, Spain, and as soon as they started reporting large numbers of infections or deaths from COVID, then you had moved to Spain and moved to France and most other European countries, and they all kind of followed each other. In terms of the timing of it, it was within like 10 days or something, or 2 weeks. Everybody followed suit, and then they all started following the same easing of the lockdown approach. It was very, you could put that down to the virus, that the virus itself was kind of like dying off or going away essentially because of the change in weather or whatever, as these kind of seasonal flu like viruses do. But there was a coherency among all of these governments, and they seemed, obviously we know that a lot of them are getting information from advisors or scientific committees that unelected essentially, that work for the government, and they're scientists supposedly, or scientific advisors who are telling governments around the world what to do. Of course, you've got the World Health Organization, who is also handing out missives and instructions to governments. And governments, that's the problem that people need to understand about this, is that it's not your government really deciding, at least not primarily your government, that's deciding to impose these lockdowns and impose the different social distancing measures, etc., on people. They're getting that from unelected scientific officials, and some of them within the country in question, but others outside the country, who don't work for your government. They work for the World Health Organization, for example. Mm-hmm. So there's no real accountability. You don't know these people, and you don't know you have to assume and hope that they have a positive agenda, that they don't have some nefarious motive for doing what they're doing, But certainly it was clear to me anyway that governments were simply following the orders of someone else, and all following the same orders from someone else. That to me suggests that it's some supranational or transnational organization that's handing out instructions to governments, and they're all doing it. They're all following those instructions, mostly to the letter, despite the resistance from the local populations and, many people, and despite the fact that they're making a lot of the population in their respective countries, unhappy and making them suffer. Governments were sticking to instructions essentially that they were given by someone else, by someone above them, let's say, in a hierarchy. And of course, you could say that governments do that because, well, most governments are made of politicians, and they're not scientists, they're not doctors, they don't know, so they have to follow the instructions of someone else. But there's an awful lot about this this situation over the past 2 months with coronavirus that you don't have to be a doctor or a scientist to see that it's deeply flawed and a very bad idea and doesn't help or isn't working. You don't have to be a scientist to figure those things out, because many of them are just like common sense in a certain, for example, no one has ever explained why from the beginning you or I or any of us, I think, could go to a supermarket at any time we wanted, every day if we wanted, where we could, mingle in, social distancing notwithstanding, because you can't always stay 2 meters or whatever it is from everybody in a supermarket. With maybe 200 people in a supermarket, you have to squeeze past them. This happened to me multiple times. So I'm allowed to do that, mingle in with 200 people, sometimes in close quarters, doing my shopping for an hour, 2 hours, as long as I wanted, really, every day. But I couldn't go to a restaurant. Where if you think about it, I go to a restaurant, I call the restaurant, I say, have you got a table for two? They say yes. I go there at 8 o'clock in the evening, whatever it is, and I go into the restaurant. I meet one person at the restaurant. He can keep his social distance. He can keep 2 meters from me. I say, I got a reservation. He says, okay, yeah, that table over there, table for two in the corner. All the tables are at least 1 meter or maybe even 2 meters away from everybody else. I sit there with the person that I came with. I spend an hour, 2 hours eating, and then I get up. I pay my bill, hopefully, and then I get up and I leave. And I've been in close contact with really nobody, and I've been in an establishment with far less people than in a supermarket. But I'm not allowed to do that. And that's just one example of the strictures that they put on people that don't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, a major problem from the very beginning that the government has kind of like, you got the impression that governments, they've stayed away from it, studiously avoided it, but whenever it was brought up, they've kind of like just bullshitted their way out of it, or stuck their fingers in their ears and said, la, 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 we're not listening to you. It's about herd immunity. Herd immunity is a kind of a medical or scientific / medical principle that's been used for 100 years for viruses of this type. And it's worked very well. And there's never been any suggestion at any time that that's not that it should be changed, or that was a problem. It has always been seen, like I said, for 100 years as the best way to deal with these kind of viral outbreaks. And herd immunity is just basically letting people get on with their lives, not worrying about a viral outbreak at all. Once you understand the nature of it, that it's and they did understand the nature of it from quite early on. In February, after China had its experience with it, they understood very early on that this was more or less like a flu, like a seasonal flu-like virus that was only dangerous to the elderly, and particularly the elderly with chronic underlying conditions. And that's the same, every year with the flu, and large numbers of people die, estimated from complications from the flu every single year. And the governments and the population and the media have never batted an eyelid, never cared a thing about that. It's just a fact of life. That's just what happens, and there's not much you can do about it. But also it's seen as the most effective way of dealing with it. It's as many people as possible, let people circulate as normal, so that the virus spreads as quickly as possible, and the vast majority of people are not going to have any serious problem with it. And when they contract it, they're going to be immune to it. Therefore, they're no longer contagious. They're no longer spreading. So that's how you stop the spread of an illness as quickly as possible. The government just ditched that. Governments around the world just ditched that idea completely in favor of exactly the opposite, which is, prolonging the period during which a virus is around and can be spread around the population. It makes no sense whatsoever, and of course, it doesn't. There's no evidence, no scientific evidence. I mean, as far as we've been able to look at the situation so far. In this case, there's no evidence that lockdowns help to mitigate the dangers or the mortality rate from from these kinds of viruses, and in fact, the kind of associated deaths from the lockdown may turn out to be much larger. So the only conclusion is that, for me anyway, is that it's kind of it's a bit hard to get your head around in a sense, but it's that the government did want to, or was given instructions that from someone, or let's just call it the government. The governments around the world decided, on someone else's advice maybe, that they did want to severely restrict the spread of this virus around the population, but not to save lives, because the approach they took was not to save lives. It did help to, let's say, stop the spread, I think, of the virus around a large percentage of the population, thereby providing herd immunity. But they didn't do it to save lives. They did it for some other reason. That's the only conclusion I can come to. And I know it doesn't make much sense, but that's, it's that like Sherlock Holmes maxim. Does anybody know it? Whenever you've ruled out the improbable, whatever's left, however implausible must be the truth. Something like that. That's where I'm at on it, in that the measures they have taken have been designed to stop the spread of the virus around the population, in the case that the virus itself is not dangerous to the vast majority of the population. Why would they want to do that? I don't know. I mean, you can do a 2 + 2 = 4 and say that maybe there's something positive about the virus, but I don't know. I mean, there are some studies that, people know so very little. I'm not saying I know a lot either, but I know a little bit more than the average person, I think, about viruses, just because I've studied them a little bit, and the very basics, And there are millions of viruses floating around all the time, and people think they're all deadly, but I think probably a majority of them are actually beneficial in one way or another for humans and for other mammals. And there are viruses that confer protection and have beneficial effects on the host. So it's not totally out there or kind of crazy to suggest that there may have been something about this virus that was positive or beneficial, and that the government, that's my most fringe theory, that the government did not want, or someone above the government, or someone handing advice to governments, did not want those beneficial effects to accrue to the population through the widespread of the virus. And that's why they followed the lockdown procedure, when it made no sense whatsoever, and it was breaking with standard policy and tradition for 100 years as to how to deal with these kind of outbreaks, which are very similar to the flu.
Well, it's certainly not saved any deaths, right?
No, it's probably increased deaths. The fact of the matter is that the people who have died with this, and most people have probably heard about the with-from thing, and it's true to say that nobody dies with coronavirus in the same way no one dies from coronavirus, in the same way no one dies from the flu. Influenza has never been put down as an underlying cause of death on any death certificate, ever before, because influenza is not a notifiable disease. It's not classified as a disease. It's classified as an organism or something like that, which means that you can't put it down in a death certificate. And the reason that's never been, they have never done that, and the reason they can't put it down in a death certificate is because they know that basically pretty much no one dies as a result of contracting a flu virus, a common flu virus, because it's not dangerous enough. You have to have a significantly weakened system or some kind of a genetic disorder or whatever for the flu to be a contributing factor to your death, and that's why they call it a contributing factor to the death of someone. But that person who dies with the flu was in one way or another in a precarious state of health, or a very poor state of health already. So they've never, in any statistics, they never put down the influenza as the underlying cause of death. And that's the same case with coronavirus. If you look at, well, in the case of the flu, the vast majority of people who die with the flu every year are people older, generally over 65s, with 1, 2, or 3 or more serious underlying conditions. And the flu virus, the respiratory issues that it causes, and knock-on effects, etc., can be too much for someone and push them over the edge, and they die. But on the death certificate, they put down the pre-existing chronic issues or illnesses that the person had. Those are the cause of death. Any doctor will tell you that that's what they've done all along. Of course, it's quite difficult sometimes for doctors to actually figure out what actually caused it. In any situation to cause, in a lot of situations, to figure out what to write on a death certificate, the attending GP or doctor has sometimes a difficult job to figure out exactly what caused someone to die. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. But flu is never put on the death certificate. And when you look at COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, it is really only dangerous to exactly the same demographic, over 65s with chronic underlying conditions. And so the same rule should apply, that you can't put COVID-19 as a disease from SARS-CoV-2 on the death certificate of anybody who dies and having tested positive for SARS-2. But they have been in massive numbers. And the reason they were able to do that, in fact, was that the various health bodies in major countries around the world, and including the World Health Organization, at the beginning of March, elevated COVID-19 to a notifiable disease. They essentially elevated it to the status of a disease like Ebola or some serious infection, serious disease, so that they could put it down as an underlying cause of death. And that obviously raises my suspicions that the reason they did that was that they could actually have official death certificates with lots of people having died from COVID-19 and shove that in people's faces 24/7. Otherwise, they would never have done any testing like they do with the flu. They never do any. They do very little testing, and every year they estimate how many people die from the flu in any given year. Last year, I think it was 600. The World Health Organization, or the CDC estimates that 650,000 people died from complications with the flu, but they've no idea. It could be 300,000, and I think they give a spectrum of somewhere between 300,000 to 1.5 million. They just, general estimates from data they collect and stuff, but they never test anybody, so they don't know if those people who died with what they say was complications from the flu, they don't know if those people had any flu virus in them at the time of death at all. They just estimate based on case of pneumonia or respiratory illnesses, kind of different reports culled from different places. And they should have done the same thing with this virus, because it's pretty much the same thing, but they didn't. They elevated to, like I said, to the level of a disease, which means then that they start to, produce tests that they can test people for, but the other thing is, in many cases, they're not being tested, which is another question maybe that we'll get back to, as to why they haven't been testing a lot of people, or why they've been dragging their feet on testing people. But certainly they wanted to be able to put down COVID-19 as the underlying cause of death, in order to scare people, to say that this is a very dangerous virus that's literally killing people all by itself, which is totally untrue. If you look at the data from Italy, I think it was 99% of people who died were, again, in that age group, over 65, with 1, 2, or 3 chronic underlying conditions, and 52% of those 99 had 3 chronic underlying conditions. That's the people who died in Italy, and I mean, it's bizarre. It's just, I don't understand it really, because I mean, it's like living in 2 different realities at the same time, because on the one hand, I think everybody knows that COVID-19 is not a danger to the majority of people, but everybody is acting as if it is. And I mean, again, what I was saying at the beginning was that I think most people don't know the numbers of people who die and who those people are. The majority of people who die, and the numbers of the numbers who die every month in any given country, people don't know it. They've never known it. Like in the UK, or where you're from, Elliot, 60,000 people die every month. And about 75% of those are over 65s with chronic underlying conditions. That's every month. So 75% of 60, about 45,000 people. 45,000 people die every single month on average in the UK. These, old people that we're meant to be protecting right now. But for the past forever, basically, 45,000 of those people have died every single month in the UK, and we've never cared.
Right.
Why are we caring now that when 30,000 have died?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because the government is telling us to care for some reason.
Yeah. So, yeah. But the other thing is that there's been a lot of problems with testing in terms of, I'm pretty sure if they wanted to, they could put out they could easily distribute effective tests to show whether or not a person, to find the infection rate, an accurate infection rate, and to find out whether people who have died, people who die over this period of 6 weeks or 2 months, how many of them actually tested positive for SARS-CoV-2. But they've been very slow and dragging their feet on making those tests available widely. And I think it's because if they were to do that, and if they had done that from the very beginning, very quickly it would become apparent just how many people had been infected. And of course, the numbers are probably smaller than it would be if there was no lockdown, but still a significant number of people, I think, have already had this virus. And if you were able to test, the whole country or a large percentage of the country, you'd get a very high number relatively of people who had already contracted the virus. And then if you compared that to the numbers of deaths, you would see that it's in the same range as the flu. But what they've been doing totally disingenuously from the beginning is showing you data or statistics that compared the number of deaths with the number of people who had tested positive for it and had not died. Mm-hmm. But that obviously doesn't include all of the people who haven't been tested and had it and didn't die as well. So, and of course, in doing it that way, you can come up with a death or mortality rate of maybe 4 or 5%, which is, or 3 or 4%, which is a lot more, 20 or 30 times the mortality rate of the flu. But that's stupid, and it's amazing to me that they were able to pass that off, and media will actually put out those figures, and when it's patently false, mm-hmm. When you have to know what the mortality rate is, you have to test. Well, literally, you have to test the whole country to find out exactly how many people had this virus, and then look at how many people died, and you'll get a tiny percentage of the population, a fraction of 1%, a very small fraction of 1% of people of a mortality rate. But that's no good if you want to have a lockdown, right? If your goal is having a lockdown and imposing all of these strictures and removal of freedoms and, really squeezing people almost just for fun in a certain sense, it seems to me anyway, that's why they're doing it, because there's no justification for it. And someone is enjoying exerting this level of control and power over the population. If you want to do that, you have to have a good reason to do it. And you have to, it has to be a fear-based reason. You have to be able to scare the population. And the best way you scare the population is tell them that, show them false or bogus statistics that this virus is much more deadly than anything we've seen in recent history, and that many people might die and all this kind of stuff, which is just not true. And I don't know what's going to happen after this lockdown is fully eased or whatever happens, or however it's going to go. But when they look back, if we can look back on more objective numbers and show that really it was no different, it was no more deadly than the flu, how are people going to react? Are people going to react? Are they going to say that it was the lockdown that stopped that from happening, which again is false, because there have been enough people who that have been tested or have been shown to have contracted the virus and had no symptoms whatsoever. And the statistics that they can't fudge is the demographic, the type of people who are dying with this virus. I mean, you can't say that 50,000 young, healthy 25-year-olds died from it. I mean, I'm assuming they can't do that, and they're not going to have those kind of statistics. The only statistics they're going to have is that, like I said before, the people who died with this virus, or for whom this virus was a contributing factor to their death, were people who were in very poor health anyway and had very low or very short life expectancy anyway.
Yeah.
And that's the same as the flu. So how are they going to spin that? I don't know. We live in a bizarro world right now. It's where nothing really makes any sense, where it's like the government is just doing what it wants and just repeating the message over and over again in the face of facts to the contrary. They're just pushing the same hysterical, this is dangerous, stay at home, social distancing measures, blah, blah, blah. And there's no reason for it. I mean, another one, but I give the example of the restaurant, going to the supermarket or going to the restaurant, and why you can go to the supermarket and why you can't go to a restaurant as one example. But another one is beaches. I'm shutting down beaches. Now, not everywhere not every country in Europe, especially this time of year, has a climate that would, means that people would be even interested in going to the beach at this time of year. But there are some places, especially in the west coast of the US and south of the US and in southern Europe, where people would still go to the beach. But beaches were closed across all of these countries. You weren't allowed. It was the last place you were allowed to go was the beach. But there's plenty of studies, if you're looking up, plenty of studies showing that the sea air and the iodine and the salt and the sodium and magnesium in the sea air is extremely beneficial for lungs.
Mm-hmm.
They've done multiple studies to show that people with various, lung issues show a marked improvement when they go and spend a couple of weeks at the beach breathing the sea air. So if you wanted to cure people, why would you stop them going to the beach? If you want to help them, let's say, if you wanted to, because it's all about the infection. That's what we keep coming back to. It's all about the infection, stopping people getting this virus, despite the fact that it's not really dangerous to the vast majority of people, but we still don't want anybody to get it, despite the fact that everybody getting it as fast as possible is the fastest way to bring an end to it. Still, we don't want people to get it. Why? I keep asking the question, why don't you want people to get this? Because you don't have any good reason at all for not wanting people to get this. It goes against standard scientific practice or medical practice in these cases, and you're going against that. You're stopped because you want really, 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 really want people to not get this, even though it's not a danger to the vast majority of them. Why? That's why I come to the conclusion that there's some other reason they don't want people to get it, for some other reason, not for their health, not because it's a danger, not because it's going to make millions of people sick and whatever or make millions die or hundreds of thousands die. That's the data on that is clear at this point. That was never going to happen, and I think they knew it from the beginning. Well, there's evidence that they should have known. That they're smart people, right? They can figure things out. They have their scientists to show that was not going to happen. It was not going to be a deadly pandemic, but still they pushed hard and fast with stopping people contracting this virus. Why?
It's a good question. Well, as you were saying before, Joe, about the idea that when we look back on this, assuming we do have some good figures and things to look at, people are going to think that the reaction to this was incredibly overblown. And especially, considering the amount of good information that is actually getting out, maybe it's just my personal perspective, but it seems like there's been a rapid increase in the amount of good information, people who are actually looking at the numbers, analyzing them. There was one that just came out recently where there was a person who was analyzing the code behind what Neil Ferguson had done, on which the whole UK lockdown was based on. So it just seems like there are a number of people out there who are actually spreading this good information, and more people are becoming aware of the situation for what it really is. So I personally think that the elite, the leaders, are going to have a lot to answer for, especially when the full kind of repercussions of the lockdown, all the economic repercussions, etc., really start to pile up, and people really start to see the consequences of this thing that has gone on. So
yes, I would like to think so. There'll be a lot of difficult questions put to government, and they'll have to and there'll be a lot of hard-hitting expose articles that will blow the whole thing wide open and show how evil government is, and governments will fall, and we'll all march off into a utopia where we only have nice governments who don't do anything weird and nasty. Yeah, I'd like to believe that, but I don't know. It would be a turn off for the books, at least in my experience. If that were to happen, I'm not exactly sure of the mechanism by which they'll just ignore this. But what we do know the mechanism is that it's just, people don't care. Most people don't care. I mean, you have to remember that a lot of people, I don't know what percentage of the population, but a lot of people out there are fully behind this. Even over and above them just doing it out of fear or doing it because they want to protect the elderly, as they've been told. There's a lot of people out there who seem to really like following what the government says. They seem to be, to a certain extent, enjoying the overweening intrusion of government into their lives. There's a lot of people who are very dependent on authority in a very visceral kind of way, and they are having a very different response to this lockdown situation than you or I or any of us here, where we're really feeling we're feeling quite indignant, let's say, and outraged at the government ruling or controlling the minutiae of our lives. There's other people who seem, I think, that they don't have a problem with that whatsoever. So those people are going to be very, very unlikely to, even after the fact, if there's some data comes out that shows that that it was all overblown, I don't think they're going to complain. And the people who do complain, I don't know what voice do they have. They can do it on social media. They can do it. They can maybe have an odd protest or something. But the media is not going to, not going to be their champion in that respect. So I think in the same way that Saddam's weapons of mass destruction were just made to go away, or were ignored at the time, even though, I was saying at the time about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, that's 17 years ago, I was pointing out the problem along with quite a few other people, and the media completely ignored us and called us conspiracy theorists. And then maybe 2 years later, I think, lessons to be learned from the way the media admitted mea culpa. We should have learned some lessons. We shouldn't have been so quick to believe the government. Blah blah blah. But now that we've said mea culpa, let's just move on.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason why this won't follow the same process. There'll be mealy mouthed words to excuse it all. That's assuming things don't go really bad in the sense of the economy. We still don't know the full effects in the economy or how it's going to recover as it's beginning to now. I suppose as a lot of places are starting to unlock down. We still have to wait and see. It'll probably be 6 months or a year before we see the full effects of it, and it can have knock-on effects. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. There's no way to know that, particularly because I was saying the economy has been for a very long time a kind of funny money economy, and they can print money and make up figures to their heart's content. It's all about sentiment. How the markets feel today. How does the market feel today? Has it got a headache, or is it okay? If the market feels okay, then the economy is doing good. If the market doesn't feel good, then stocks and shares go down. Actually, that's that market economy feeling and the effect it has. How are the markets today is actually there's something like 25 or 30 big hedge fund managers around the world who control the purse strings of a large amount of capital around the world. And it's those guys, if they come out and publicly say, or say in the channels that they say it, that they like one thing or or don't like this, or do like one stock or don't like another stock, or make a comment on some industry, that's where market sentiment comes from. It's the sentiment of those guys. That can affect entire economies, So it's all pretty fake in that respect. And like I was saying, it's very much decoupled from the actual, nuts and bolts economy and the actual value or the worth in terms of tables and chairs of any given country. So I don't know. It's all a bit, for me, that's all unknown. It's just a scandal. This whole situation is a scandal of massive proportions, and the scariest part of it for me, or the most interesting maybe part of it, is to see how people have reacted. and to see the inability of so many people to notice a line of bullshit when it comes their way. And the even worse is to actually enjoy it. They may recognize it's bullshit, but they're fond of bullshit, basically. Or just it's more like the authoritarian follower mentality among so many people. That's kind of scary. I thought there would have been limits to even the authoritarian follower mindset. That when you're told that you have to imprison yourself in your house for 2 months on the basis of a scare, a viral scare, I thought that might have been pushing the limits of people's, even the most ardent authoritarian follower, of their ability to accept that, but apparently not, and many people willingly jumping on the kind of the enforcement bandwagon as well, where people will call the police on their neighbors or give shit to their neighbors for going out and shout at people for endangering the old. There's a lot of people that are just waiting for their moment, their 5 moments of authority, sanctioned by us, where they're empowered to go out and control their communities in some way or other. There's a lot of people really ready for that, and they're dangerous people. So that's been I think that's probably the most important lesson in all of this, apart from we already knew the governments are fairly are suspect. Let's say governments are suspect, and you can't easily just dismiss any conspiracy theories about government malfeasance or wrongdoing. You can't just automatically dismiss it. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that governments get up to pretty nasty stuff. So we, not in that sense, I'm not that surprised. What I'm most surprised about is, and what I've learned the most about, is other people in society and the divisions in society between, those people who are essentially ardent, really strong authoritarian followers who have a very strong need to rely on authority to tell them what to do their thinking for them, and other people who have a stronger sense of their own personal power or personal sovereignty or independence, where they're willing to go against the grain no matter what the grain is. If what they're being told doesn't make sense, they can stand up and speak out. And it's interesting that it's interesting as well that in the US, for example, that the people who are out protesting about the lockdowns are, I don't know if all of them are, but a good portion of them would tend to be conservatives and Trump supporters. Not that better to say just conservatives, And of course, they're the people who have been, for the past few years, have been, pushing back against, radical leftist politics and that kind of thing as well. And I think it's probably true that a good percentage of the authoritarian followers, the ones who are most happy to go along with the lockdowns and government dictates, would have also been people who would have leaned over the past few years towards those kind of radical social justice agendas. So it's kind of there's sort of a continuation there, between the two,
It's ironic because they were the ones. It was the conservatives who've been accused of being the Nazis, right?
Right.
Whereas you see, it's now the tides have turned, and actually, they don't necessarily seem to be the ones who are welcoming these completely uncalled for, strict draconian measures, kind of thing. On social media, it's really easy to kind of get stuck in an echo chamber kind of thing. But just to echo your thoughts on that, Joe, I would say that's been really the most eye-opening part of this whole thing. It's like you can't expect any different from governments, right? You start learning about the kind of thing that they get up to, and you should be anticipating that they will do that at any chance. As soon as they get the opportunity, they will jump on it. But it's seeing how there is this such major division, and authoritarians have just kind of sprung up out of nowhere and really seem to be taking pleasure in enforcing that on others. And that's the scary thing. It's like, it's not just that they're going on their business and, following orders and not questioning themselves, but it's actually that they will jump. They'll jump on your status, or they'll jump on what anyone else says. It's like, it's so threatening to their worldview. It's almost like it causes them pain and they need to shut it down. Right. And it's amazing. It's so interesting to see people who you previously did not necessarily suspect this of, and then all of a sudden, it seems that they show their true colors.
Right. It's a real separation of I don't know. I don't want to get biblical, but the wheat and the chaff in a certain sense, And the thing about Nazis, it's ridiculous that conservatives were called Nazis, because, the left, the radical left, or the left-leaning people in the Western world anyway, are the ones who clearly had most had the strongest reliance on government. Right, they're the ones who wanted all of the social government to mandate all sorts of social policies to help the poor, or help them, the marginalized, or the migrants, etc., etc. They wanted government. They couldn't do it themselves, so they want government to come in and change the world, make the world a better place for them. So those people, by definition, are the ones who are most reliant in their inner core on authority. So when you get an authority, if an authority comes along that is a evil or malevolent authority, then it's those leftist types, as we call them today, who have the most reliance on authority, who will be the followers of that evil authority. They will be the Nazis by definition. What defines you as a Nazi, if you want to use that term, is your strict reliance and obedience to authority. You might be a nice person when you've got a nice government and you're following the dictates of the government to the letter, as long as the dictates are nice dictates, are positive dictates. But as soon as it's negative, what's clear is that when it switches to an evil government, those people won't switch to be anti-government. They'll maintain their core need, which is reliance on, to believe in everything that the government says, and believe that the government's doing this, doing right, basically, whatever it is. And that was the case in Nazi Germany. So the vast majority of the Nazis, by definition, were what we would call today leftists, because the Nazis who followed the Nazi program, citizens who were Nazis, who supported or joined the Nazi party, whatever, they were the ones who obviously were relying most on, fixated most on government and doing whatever the government said. And today, the people who are doing that, who show that nature, are the radical lefties. So if you want to use that term, I don't like using that term at all. Nazis, it's stupid. It's just like, it's not really relevant today in a certain sense, except in that divide between people who are strict authoritarian followers and need an external sense of authority in their lives, and others who have their own sense of authority.
Definitely.
Yeah. So,
well, unless you guys have any other questions, I guess we could maybe wrap it up. Well,
yeah, I don't know. There's no point in going into all the numbers and all that kind of stuff. And, we've already said it. Anybody can look at them if they want and compare them to previous flu seasons and all that kind of stuff and see that this really isn't anything different from a bad flu season. And then ask yourself the question, why? Why is the government reacting as if it's, a biblical plague or something? It's a Black Death or something, when it's not. The figures show that it's not. The data shows that it's not. And, people are all over social media. People are using, statistics and stuff to argue against the lockdowns and to try and expose it and stuff, But at this point, I don't need to look at any. I still do, but I don't need to look at any more figures to draw that conclusion that this was essentially, in historical terms, in modern terms, this was a nothing burger.
Yeah.
And but they made a really big deal, out of nothing, for ulterior motives. That's the only conclusion, that they did it for ulterior motives. And the ulterior motives, obviously, the only ulterior motive that is obvious, is manifest, is the lockdowns and the strictures on. It's almost like it's a giant. They used it as an excuse for a giant experiment in social social engineering, essentially,
Yeah.
to see how far they could push people and see how they would react. What if we said that you can't, leave your house except from the door and back to the door once a day for 30 minutes, and all the rest of the time you had to stay inside? What if we said that? What would people say? It's interesting question. How do we apply that? How do we justify that? Well, there's always a virus. People are scared of viruses, aren't they? And they know nothing about them. So, yeah. And of course, the only other thing I'd say is that the way they're easing out of it now is being done out of necessity, in the sense that, you see, like I said before, governments, it seems clear to me that governments were, well, it's not even clear to me, it's clear to most people, I think, is that governments were being given these instructions as to how to go about dealing with this virus, i.e. lockdown, social distancing, all that kind of stuff. They were being given those instructions by someone else. So in a certain sense, governments were given a problem. They were told, follow these instructions to the letter. Those instructions caused a lot of social upheaval and social chaos and a lot of resentment from a lot of people. And that resentment, obviously, people believe that the government decided to do this, therefore the government's responsible. So the overt government, like Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, all Macron in France, the Italian, Spanish governments, all of them who have put really severe restrictions on their populations and made them suffer quite a lot and killed quite a lot of people as a result, they realize that there's potential for a lot of anger directed at them as a result of this. If they don't, they can't just end it all of a sudden and let everything go back to normal. That's why they talk about there's going to be no new normal. There's going to be an easing of the restrictions over the next few months. We'll allow some restaurants to open. We'll allow some of this to open. We'll allow some of that to open. There'll be no sports games until next year. That's all to justify what they've done, essentially, because they can't just suddenly bring it to an end. People go, what? The virus just went away all of a sudden and we need to go back to normal? What was that 2 months for? You know what I mean? They have to have a plausible
escape route.
A plausible exit strategy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That doesn't make a mockery of what they had just done, because that runs the risk of people getting wise to it, and getting angry. So that unfortunately that means that we have to put up with this, feckless, idiotic easing of the restrictions, where we can only do, we can still only, you can't go back to life as normal, But I think eventually it will, once they get a read that people have, eased them back into normal life, that it will go back to normal. That's assuming they haven't done something really bad to the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because they get a picture of how willing people are to go along with the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were saying, that you pretty clearly saw in the first couple of weeks who was going to follow all the mandates and who wasn't, what type of people are going to step out of line and what aren't,
right. Yeah.
So maybe for an overview for some future scenario, they can count on so many people just, going along with the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we'll have to wait and see, but I think there's probably more nonsense coming down the pipeline, more chaos, more craziness going to be happening on this planet. They've almost opened, in a certain sense, they've opened the gates of something scary by doing this. You know what I mean? And I think there's other things going to be coming through those gates in the not too distant future. So we just need to be prepared. And there may be things that make this little episode pale into insignificance.
Oh, God.
Well, our dark overlord, Bill Gates, is already talking about pandemic 2. So we'll see what he means by that.
Well, what they all mean by that is just a return of SARS-CoV-2, but big deal. It wasn't a big deal this time. If it comes back, the flu comes back every year. So what's your point? Well, unless you're going to decide now that every time there's a flu-like illness, we go into lockdown for 2 months, then that's a big deal. But the point is, it shouldn't have happened. Unless Bill Gates. Yeah?
You referenced something else coming through the gates, perhaps in the future, which may be a little bit more sinister. What kind of thing Do you think, Mike?
What kind of
Elliot,
beast?
that's
To be determined.
what's the phrase? The poem.
What beats
What-
slouches
what
towards
rough-
Bethlehem?
What rough beast slouches towards Bethlehem? Yeah, is that what you're asking? I don't know. What's going to come down to? Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens with the economy. Like I said, it could. I mean, if the economy goes into quote unquote free fall or something like that, then you're going to have some serious issues. I mean, something that would make this pale into insignificance would be if there was serious food shortages. I mean,
Right.
the people have had a little bit of food shortages and stuff, but I'm talking about serious food shortages where there's nothing in the supermarket and people are starving. People are queuing up and dependent on government for handouts. You know, millions and millions of people, like maybe 50% of the population. You know, that's a bad scenario. People don't know. They talk about this being a pandemic. They have no idea. I mean, a pandemic, like they're pretending this is one where there are bodies in the streets. People are falling over dead in the streets, right? Young people, everybody, old people, children, everybody's dead. I mean, a pandemic is when there's 30-40% of the population dead. That's a pandemic. These people have no idea what they're talking about. They better not say pandemic too often, because it's like kind of like Beetlejuice. You know, if you say it 3 times, you'll get a real one. Because they're not. I don't know what people will just lose their shit completely. So. Yeah, something like that. In the weather, the environment is pretty chaotic, pretty crazy these days. If it can go, you know, it can go bad pretty quickly in terms of growing seasons and you know, the enough harvest big enough to you know to feed everybody on the planet and stuff, and it can go pretty bad pretty easily, pretty quickly. So and much worse than this. This is just a little taster, you know, and in a certain sense it may be good because it kind of climatizes everybody, us included, to dealing with a crisis, even though we know this was a manufactured fake crisis. It gave us a good feel of what one might be like, and maybe it prepares us in a way for something more real, much more real and more serious that could be coming down the pike. So that's all I'm going to tell you, Elliot. I'm sorry, I don't have my crystal ball right here, so I'll have to get back to you.
Oh, we don't want any spoilers anyway.
Yeah. Cliffhanger.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I got to push off here.
Very good.
So, thanks again for inviting me. I watch your show a lot, and I like it. You're all super cool, super good, super interesting people, and I'll come back for the next pandemic as long as it's a real one.
Yeah.
Oh, with that stipulation. Okay.
Yeah, it has to be real. I'm not doing this
there's-
again just for just for shits and giggles. I want the real deal.
Well, thanks a lot for joining us, Joe. That
All
was
right,
great.
no problem. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later, Joe.
See ya.
Yeah.
See you, Joe.
See ya.
Bye.
And thanks for joining us, everybody.
Oops.
Excuse that slight error there.
All right, that's it. Bye, guys.
I could have still said it. Okay.
It's still recording.
Okay.
I'm going to leave it on. And I'm going to stop it now.